we've got. I'm going to cut short the introduction because I think both of our guests tonight want to get away and doorstep people or whatever you're going to do. I'm not quite sure. But from Greenpeace, we've got Greenpeace US. We've got Chris Miller, who's the Director of Climate Campaigns, and Michael Dorsey, Professor of Global Environmental Policy at Dartmouth University, New Hampshire. Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. And also from the Durban Group. Actually, maybe you could just tell us who the Durban Group is, because it's less well known than Greenpeace. I don't think we'll explain Greenpeace.
Sure. The Durban Group, it's actually the Durban Group for Climate Justice. It's an umbrella organization of about 150 plus NGOs from around the world, from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, North America, all over the Pacific Islands that have been working on climate justice issues, and it came together actually in Durban, South Africa in 2004. Was the first meeting sponsored by some folks in Sweden to really begin to probe the issues of climate justice, and particularly looking at the heavy dependence and reliance on market solutions for climate change and how those proposals weren't really working.
Okay, I'm going to... Oh, I've got a mic extender here, so I don't have to lean right across the screen. Thanks. That's Jeffrey Allen of OneWorld US helping me out. Okay, because it's Congressman Markey made that statement and we're following it up, I think we're going to probably focus on the US, and also because the US is so important at these negotiations, either positively or negatively, or even if they're not involved, they seem to be incredibly important. So maybe we should go straight in. Let me just ask you, do you think doing this is an experiment? We were hoping that to bring you the sort of bring people a press conference that they wouldn't possibly have seen otherwise, maybe have speakers from the press conference or other people, give them a chance to ask questions. And if you've got questions, send them in quickly, because we haven't got that much time tonight. So do you think that it's pretty raw technology at the moment, but technology moves, so are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutral?
I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, I know that, tens and tens of thousands of people participate in Second Life, and I think one of the things that in many cases is missing from this type of forum is more public participation, a way for people to plug into the process here. It's a complicated and complex process, but I think to the degree that people can be more engaged, I think that's important. So I reckon there's a future in it.
Yeah. Do you want to hazard make a no vote?
Well, no, I mean, I guess I'm the Second Life skeptic that you were referring to. However, at the same time, as a professor, I've used a lot of digital video technologies to connect disparate corners of the globe, with my students in Hanover, not just because Hanover is a remote location, but because it's sometimes easier to pull people in a dialogue from South Africa and London and Ecuador in one room using kind of new technologies. So I think to the extent to which the Second Life provides a venue to bridge the physical geographic barriers, it's a great innovation. I think we might try to get beyond some of the escapism that may be characteristic of it, but I think as a technology, I think it's something that we've got to explore, and I think to the extent to which people are dialed into it, it's a fine venue to really bring issues like climate change to a really, really broad audience.
Okay, that's pretty positive. Let's get into Congressman Markey's comments were pro-activism in a sense. He was coming from that side of the US. Outside the US has a very bad image, and the NGOs at this conference so far, every day they name the bad guys, the evildoers, and the US is up there with Canada, Australia, Japan, usually, occasionally Saudi Arabia. Do you think that's fair insofar as you're following the negotiations? They're made out to be, the US, a pretty negative force in this conference.
I don't think that's being misrepresented. I think, as you know, the United States is the single largest emitter. And the fact that we are not at the table participating productively in these negotiations is a huge problem. We hear the administration talking about the need to engage developing countries, China, India, and I think unless and until the United States can really sort of, take responsibility for our piece of the problem and to engage in a much more productive way here, I am not optimistic that this problem can be solved. Having said that, I think Ed Markey, I think Senator Kerry, having come to the conference earlier this week, I think many of us who work for U.S. NGOs are here to tell the story of the other America. And so I do think things are changing back home, and I am optimistic that ultimately the U.S. will come back to the table here and participate in a productive way. But that's not clearly what's happening here in Bali.
The other America is kind of interesting, and it is true that we don't hear about it so much. Maybe one of the effects of the publicity around the conference is to make people abroad realize that in some ways, the U.S. is ahead of many European countries who tend to sort of say, hey, the U.S. is lagging. But would you say that the other America is doing pretty well in terms of state actions or individual governors or even public action on climate change? Michael Dorsey.
Well, we really have maybe three Americas. We've got an America that's represented by the White House, which we can characterize as the axis of CO2. And we've got an America that's represented by a handful of somewhat visionary, but sometimes maybe too cautious representatives like Senator Kerry and others that step to the issue and try to raise attention on the issue, but sometimes don't go as far as they should or know they can. And I think Senator Kerry is a good example of this, in as much as his wife is a little more strident than he is. And then we've got the other America that's represented by communities across the country and cities, in municipalities, in states that are really pushing the envelope on what's possible and what can be done. And I think really what we're seeing is the struggle between those three Americas, and also on some extent between the representatives and the municipalities and people in communities, a collaborative working relationship as they battle against this axis of CO2, which is represented by the president, unfortunately, the current president, and also by some of his water carriers like Mr. Connaughton and so forth on down the chain to Mr. Obryansky in the State Department.
What about, can I ask you, Chris Miller, and just in terms of public opinion in the U.S., are you involved in, as it were, mobilizing public opinion on this issue? Is that part of your job? Yeah.
I mean, we're the broad focus currently of the U.S. global warming work by Greenpeace is organizing in congressional districts around the country. I think we've seen certainly a change in Americans' attitude on this issue, and so our focus is on organizing people to push their policymakers to address this issue. I think it's crucially important, and that's been the focus of our work.
There's been a couple of there's a bit of publicity this week about bills going through on car fuel economy and other things. Is that important? It's very hard for outsiders to tell how significant they are.
I think it's an important milestone. I think there's a long way to go. I think the bill that passed through the Senate would achieve something like a 60% reduction by mid-century, covering about 80% of the economy. The fact that it's passed through the initial stages that would ultimately see it become law is an important milestone. But I do think there's a long way to go. As you know, the House passed an energy bill, had a mediocre improvement in fuel economy standards. The first time in 20 years that the Congress has passed increased fuel economy standards. So these are important signs. We have a long, I think the point is well taken that the American public is well ahead of the Congress, I think, on this issue. Congress has been relatively slow to act. But having said that, I think being here and I think being able to tell the story of what's going on in Congress is important for delegates and others to hear here.